Throughout my time of making Habs videos, there's always been one very significant and prominent Montreal Canadiens prospect that I have not made a single video about. However, that's not due to negligence. That's not due to me not knowing this player or knowing his story or whatever. That's not due to me being unaware that he's as good as he is. That's just me not really having an idea on the angle I want to take in a video for him. Today, we're talking about Montreal Canadiens defenseman prospect Alexander Romanov, a guy who could probably be defined as the best Habs defenseman prospect they have in their system, and probably one of the best they've had in years. Sure, Josh Brook and Cale Fleury are really good, but in my opinion, Romanov is on a different level. Let's go over a quick, brief summary of Romanov, his history with the Habs, and how everything has fallen into place the way they are now. This is the story of Alexander Romanov. Back at the 2018 NHL Entry Draft, the Montreal Canadiens were in quite a prominent spot. They had the third overall draft pick, and there was a heavy debate as to who they were going to take with that pick. Philip Zadina, Brady Tkachuk, maybe Quinn Hughes. These were all names in the conversation, and they eventually went with Jesperi Kotkaniemi, who at the time was a pick that didn't really surprise people, but was a pick that most people would say probably went a little bit too early. Now that's fair, you could say whatever you want about the pick, but in general, the 2018 NHL draft for the Habs wasn't one where Habs fans were saying, oh yeah, we got the best players available at every single spot, and I'm 110% happy with who we got. This was a little bit of a wary draft. I remember immediately after seeing the reactions online, seeing the people on Twitter, seeing the people on Reddit, seeing Habs fans comment on these picks, it was always a sense of, okay, we'll judge in a few years. Among this group of guys was a Russian named Alexander Romanov, drafted 38th overall in the second round. It was quite a notable pick because this was a guy that people didn't really have on their radar. Romanov was ranked 179th by Future Considerations, 156th by HockeyProspect.com, 83rd by TSN and Bob McKenzie, and on NHL Central Scouting's European list, he was 115th. This is a guy the Habs took at 38th overall. So you could understand when I say the reaction to Romanov wasn't super amazing. However, this is what Trevor Timmins had to say about Romanov back at the draft. Our whole table was excited to get him. We invited him to our Stockholm Combine. Reminds you of an Emelin, but with a ton of energy. He played on the second power play unit of the Russian national team. And Timmins suggests there were some shady things going on, and that the players on the first unit were not deserving as Romanov to be on that unit. He plays like a pro. He plays the game fast, moves pucks quickly. We did not want to miss this guy. They wanted to add a left shot D, so they stepped up. They didn't think they could wait for their next pick to take him. It doesn't matter what the NHL Central Scouting ranking of the player was. So right away, Timmins was super high on this guy. He came in here and he was like, yeah, who cares if he was ranked 115th or whatever. We wanted this guy. And this guy had an impression. Because going into 2018-19, he was playing with CSKA Moscow in the KHL. He was playing as a young 18-year-old defender on one of the best teams in Russia. He only had 4 points in 43 games that season, but he really made his mark during the World Juniors. Because at the World Juniors, Alexander Romanov was an absolute beast. He had 8 points in 7 games played, a goal and 7 assists for Team Russia's U20 team as an 18-year-old just drafted guy. He was on the All-Star team at the World Juniors. He was the best defender at the World Juniors. He had the best plus-minus at the World Juniors. He won the bronze medal. He had the most assists. He had the most assists by defensemen and had the most points by all D-men in the tournament. Alexander Romanov, a guy who really wasn't on the map for all of last year, was a guy who came into the World Juniors as this random 18-year-old who was playing on CSKA Moscow, and he lit things up. He was really darn good, and he had the whole country taken by storm, especially here in Vancouver, because we all watch the World Juniors, right? Us Canadians, we watch it no matter who's playing. Romanov stood out. He won all these awards, and he had this sky-high ceiling of a guy who just plays like a bulldog. Romanov at the World Juniors was playing exactly as you would expect for a guy who's been playing pro hockey in the KHL for the past few months. He had that maturity, he had that first step, he had that breakout pass, he had all of these assets that made him so valuable, not just as a guy who could break the puck out of his own end and clear things out in Team Russia's zone, but a guy who could get those assists too. A goal and 7 assists, good enough to set him up as one of the highest scoring players in the entire tournament. Romanov was an absolute beast. And it was then that we really started to note that this guy had potential. This is a guy who was playing sheltered minutes on a KHL team who was given the top role on Team Russia against other guys his age. This was the one opportunity he really needed to showcase that he's got more than what the KHL allows him to show. And he really took advantage of that. Going forward into the next few months, Romanov didn't get too many points at the KHL level, and starting things out in 2019-20, he's only at 0 points in 11 games played at the moment of recording this video, but that's fine, because Romanov has recently been working his way up, and for a few games this month, he was slotted into the first defenseman pairing slot for his hockey team. Romanov is being relied upon as one of the top defenders on CSKA Moscow, despite only being 19 years old. It's weird to think that he's my age, but he's displayed the necessary growth into having all of us outsiders look at him and say, dang, that's a top 4 defenseman in the making. That's a guy who could man a power play. That's a guy who could man the penalty kill. This is the best Habs defenseman prospect we've had in a while. Romanov is aggressive. He can hit guys. He's not afraid to do that. He's not even that big either. Romanov is only 5'11", 183 pounds, but he plays like he's 6'3". He's got some quick feet. He's got a quick breakout pass. He's got all these safe and necessary movements that a defenseman can have that make him such a high-quality player. Now, do I think Romanov will come into the NHL, and by the time he's in his prime, he's getting over a point per game like he did at the World Juniors? No. I think, to me, Romanov maxes out at about a 30-35 point pace in his prime as a defenseman. That's not because he lacks offensive skill, but in my opinion, he focuses more on the defensive side of things. He focuses more on the gritty side of things. He focuses more on the things that don't allow the opponent to score, rather than the things that make his own team score. The World Juniors was an anomaly case, because he was given that stage. He hasn't had that stage in the past. Romanov as the number 1 guy is something that he hadn't experienced for a few years, if not almost his whole career. Romanov used the experience of playing with men, and he applied all of that against teenagers in his own age group, and it worked. Because he was doing the things that made him successful at the KHL level, while also taking advantage of his opportunity. This is why I don't necessarily see Romanov as becoming a pure offensive defenseman who can get up to a point per game or something. I don't see that with Romanov. I see more of a safe guy, a guy who can light the crowd up with a few big hits, and a guy who's always there to help out the goalie when he's in need. Romanov shouldn't be known for his point production. He should be known for everything else that he does around that. To me, he's a solidified top 4 defenseman prospect. He will be a top 4 defenseman in the NHL if he hits his prime. And if by some miracle that offensive side of him does start blossoming, by the end of this year, he's upwards at 0.7 points per game in the KHL, then I'll eat my words here and I'll say, oh my goodness, I was wrong. And I'd be very, very happy about that. Now, I don't see that happening, but I think Romanov in itself is probably one of the more intriguing picks at the entry draft. And even some of these articles here online, Corey Pronman of The Athletic, Craig Button on TSN, a common consensus is that if the 2018 draft was redone, Romanov would be a first rounder. That's quite impressive, not as a guy who was drafted 38th overall, but as a guy who was supposed to be drafted much, much, much later. Whether that be 115th or 120, 130, 200 even, Romanov was a guy that was on no one's radar, and now, just over a year later, everyone knows that he was a legit NHL prospect in that year. That was the story of Romanov up until this point. Hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.